Welcome, I'm Brad the Builder, and in this video, I'm going to be attempting at least to make it look and feel like this Bluetooth speaker is kind of a power generator that could be used as, well, I'm going to be using it as part of a diorama base, but it could definitely be a standalone piece used on any game board as scatter terrain. So kind of the idea of it being a power generator, it could really be a goal or an obstacle of all kinds of like ways that it could be used. If you're more into like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of theme, obviously you'd have to go a slightly different direction. This is for a Warhammer Acastus Knight Asterius base. So with the Warhammer theme being kind of the grim dark future, my elements are going to be far more kind of mechanical than what would probably be appropriate for D&D. But this could definitely be adapted, at least the concept of it, so that you could, at least in theory, add audio to your game board that could even be location based. If you wanted to have multiple Bluetooth speakers kind of set up as part of the terrain, you could have volcanic sounds in one area and or war sounds happening in another. So at least that's the idea. So we're going to be jumping into 3D Studio Max to build up all of the pieces that I'm going to try to add to this. So you can see here I have a simple representation of the physical speaker that we were just looking at, along with kind of the plug receiver for the Evan Designs plug wire. So that basically I'm just going to use that, and I definitely didn't need to cut the holes or anything here. It just looks cooler. So I just did that real quick as basically a representation. So I'm going to have that somewhere in that area. Or maybe, I'm not sure. It's going to be around here somewhere, in order to allow me to essentially plug in the entire diorama. This, as basically a unit though, is going to be sitting on, and it can be removed then, from a kind of a 3D printed part that's going to look like a power generator or some industrial something to give it more of a purpose on the board. So the idea here is that I'm going to take this little Bluetooth speaker and just basically embellish it. So it's still its own thing, and it can be basically hooked up to, it's got its own power supply and everything else. But then it will look like more like, hopefully, it's part of the terrain that it's going to be sitting on, and then integrates better onto the battlefield or just into the diorama. Regardless, the idea is that it's going to be more Warhammer-esque rather than just an obviously Bluetooth speaker sitting there. So I'm just going to be basically throwing some things around. I did a couple little concept sketches like I showed you, and then I'm going to potentially make some modifications as I go, because that's just part of the process. If it looks cool in 3D here, I'm going to probably end up going ahead and printing it and seeing what it looks like physically. But we definitely have to start out getting it to look cool here. So, all right, here we go. Alright, well, I think as a terrain piece, that should be pretty good. That should be a really good space for where the speaker's going to sit. The power button on it will be right about there, so a nice open spot. And then on its opposite side, right there, is its own USB port. And then this, as essentially it has nothing to do with the speaker, that will allow my entire diorama to be basically plugged into USB wall power. And then this will be essentially out to the rest of the diorama, and into the switch, and then the switch will go out to the night. I think that's pretty darn cool. The next stage for this is going to be figuring out how to kind of break it up into smaller pieces that can then be assembled after for much easier printing. Alright, so I'm going to start figuring out how to break it up into smaller chunks. Alright, so after just kind of working through the thought process a little bit more, I even actually set a bunch of stuff up in Box. And then just kind of thought better of it and just felt like it wasn't quite ready. So I just putzed around in Max just a little bit more, and tried to do a little bit more online research in power cables, because all of this stuff just at first felt more like water piping. And it still does a little, like the big elbow here probably wouldn't be part of power cabling, but at least the ribs on here feel more like reinforced conduit. And then thinking that this section will be more essentially kind of at the back edge of the diorama. This spot here would be a spot basically for the power plug receiver to go in from the USB power source. And then there's a hole right under here to allow the wire to come out and go down, drilled through a hole in the base to connect to essentially this side then, where the power would come out. Right, there'll be another plug mounted there. And then this plug will be where essentially the power runs over to the bomb that has the switch on top and a permanent on light on the inside, so you know where the switch is going to be. And what I did, I just added these three little kind of cylinders and then these couple boxes over here, really to make it look more like it has something to do with power. And then made it look at least a little bit like two little doors here on the top have been ripped open. And hopefully that has more of the illusion of this being a power plant. So those couple little things actually went together pretty easy. All the power, all these things are essentially just very simple objects. These are boxes with a noise modifier on them, and just playing around with the seed value to basically get, the noise to look how you want it to. They are embedded into this object, so they'll all print as one. All of these pieces over here, really, really simple objects. These are all just cylinders, right? So they all just started out as single cylinders. And then I just essentially copied each of them to make a slightly narrower diameter and taller cylinder. So they all just are going to, once they're painted, have some different colored shielding, and then be either silver or copper wires. So once it's done, it'll look like there's a ton of detail there, where there's really not that much. Then these little buttresses, I really only need to export one of them as an STL. I actually have that as an STL already. The rest of the pieces have been updated.
So all of this I did go through and also add washers kind of below the bolts. So there's a little bit more detail and realism there. Well, the illusion of realism. That, you know, might be another access point for fuses, switches, whatever. It's closed, so you don't know. I thought about actually creating almost another door over here to kind of lean up against the side, as though it were, you know, ripped open also, but I'm just going to ignore that and leave it as though this were just an open panel. These cylinders would be too tall for there to be a door on there anyway. So with all of that, I think I can actually now export all these pieces, and I'll set them up in Chi2 Box. So I'll show that process, even though I don't think anybody probably needs to see it anymore. If you've seen any of my other videos, you've seen that part as well. So I'll go through it pretty fast once I get into Chi2 Box. So after this finishes real quick here, I'm just going to basically export my pieces to Chi2 Box, and then I'll set it up, and I'll be right back. So I've just gone through and brought the elements into Chi2 Box, and started laying them out. So I just kind of take each piece one at a time and rotate it around, trying to kind of get the best orientation in the space. So I want everything, and there's no way to say, oh, I'm going to actually rotate these. You want everything about a 45 to the surface, but I'm going to redo these so that they're more, and I really don't like how that rotation gizmo goes away every time you click on something. So I want those rotated so that the kind of curved back that's going to be less visible is the one that's kind of pointing down toward the build plate. And then even after that, if we need to, we can rotate them sideways there. All right, so just need to rotate them up and then back. So this is not, in my opinion, the kind of simplest, most intuitive software. I don't really think in terms of what its positive, negative are. I'm hitting it wrong every time. And it doesn't really matter, I guess. Those don't need to be oriented the same way that way. Alright, so those are good. And then probably not a bad idea to move these around a little bit more so that the supports underneath them don't end up running into the other objects as the supports are built. So with a little more room over here, we can kind of spread this out a little this way. So all of their shadows don't interrupt with any of the other objects. So, you know, obviously no guarantees. I don't know for sure, but I think this is a good starting point. If I hit the select all and go to supports, after it processes here and I look at the bottoms of all the objects, the spots that are red are where it knows it needs support. So really, like, that's a relatively minimal amount of support actually. So I'm going to go with medium to start with, 50% density, and then I just hit plus all and let it build kind of the starting everything. And it generally does a really good job with the auto supports. And then I'm going to go in. I always like to add a few heavy ones to kind of some major spots to help keep it anchored, but I do want to try to put those at least somewhat in areas where it'll be easy to smooth out what's left behind. because the heavy supports will tend to do, I wouldn't call it damage, but they will leave some little kind of bubbly spots, because these supports do penetrate further into the mesh in order to help secure it to the base, and hopefully prevent anything from lifting off the surface while it prints. Then we go in and look around for any of these little spots like under the bolts, and we're going to use light supports for that. So I really want as minimal of possible of the contact diameter, so I'm going to make that a little smaller. Well, those don't look as light as I would like, but I think that'll be okay. Any little minor damage that's going to happen to these bolts really shouldn't actually be a big deal. And it is, after all, the Warhammer universe. Which is, you know, pretty grim, dark, and dirty. So, if there's a little bit of damage in here, I don't think it's gonna hurt the aesthetic. I think it'll only add to the aesthetic. Hopefully there won't be a whole lot for islands that I have to go back and actually fix. I looked around as much as I could to get like the underside of the bolts. That's typically what's going to show up as islands, the little kind of bottom curves. As they show up without any support underneath them, they don't like to print in space. So I'm pretty sure I caught those, but we'll see. If there's anything left, it's going to be super minimal and probably won't make it fail as a print. Well, you never know. We'll see. All right, a little bit like that. That's essentially on the inside, that kind of cable housing. That I'm not too worried about. So I'm just going to go through, and any little bits like that that I find, those will not actually prevent us from having a successful print. So those two spots. Okay, so theoretically, this slice file is going to go into, and we'll see. I somehow have an issue, and I don't know why. I don't think it matters. I don't know for sure. But when the slice file saves that already looks like it's partially sliced, I want to go back and redo it. I don't know why. But it seems to basically save the image at the point where you hit the slice button. I don't really have any idea if that's what's actually being saved from that point. I don't really know. I don't want to take the chance. So we're just going to overwrite that one until our .ctb file, the one that we print from, actually has a correct preview. So there, that looks better. Then I'm gonna drop that one into the printer. And from what YouTube says here, right? And I didn't look at the last print. I know it didn't take quite as long as I think I said on camera. So this one will take about 2 hours and only take about 80 cents. These parts, to purchase them online from someone else, would cost a lot more than that, and obviously my time would be part of the value, but I'm still amazed that I can actually build this stuff and model it and then print it for such a small amount of money. It's really cool. All right, so I'll be back at the bench in no time with all my 3D printed parts ready to kind of keep moving forward.
Okay, so all of the pieces printed really well. I'm really happy with how all of it turned out. So these are really cool. I think all this stuff, once it's painted up, is going to actually look really neat. So the curves, all that turned out really well. The little, I believe, I haven't tested it yet. I think that little like rectangular socket there should fit my Evan Designs cables really well. Got a nice hole coming out, so I should be easily able, once I feed the wire in, to be able to pull it out through the bottom. This little guy turned out great. Like, if you get in there with the magnifying glass, I can even tell, right, the little handle there, the upper contact point is actually not touching. It's completely free. Little doors printed nicely. I don't know how well you're going to be able to tell that they're kind of beat up or banged up, but they're a little bent. So then the buttresses, I'm just going to at least assemble temporarily. Show you what this would look like. So this, I mean, the idea, and again, I don't know exactly how all this is going to work out. This is going to be removable. And these two pieces should be about a 45 away from each other. And then the 4 buttresses should end up, and I kind of tried to place it here so I could line up on my mat lines. I can't even see, and then this one will go under. And everything will end up in the center, right? So then, in theory at least, if everything works out right, the main power will come in here, and there will be a hole drilled down through the wooden board that I've got to get power over to here, and to the switch at the front, and that'll run underground, right? So all that'll run under the board, right? Power will come in here, go under to the power switch that's going to be at the front, and then we'll power the LED there, but then the switch will come back to this point with power to then feed the Acastus Knight. So the Acastus Knight will be switched, but it's all completely decoration. So none of that would actually need to happen if you're just going to use this as a piece of scatter terrain, right? The Bluetooth speaker gets charged up and would definitely hold the charge for most gaming sessions, right? It actually gets really good reviews on Amazon. I will leave a link to it, of course. And actually, if anybody wants the STLs that I've used for this, I'll give those away too. I don't have a problem with that. And then they will fit this speaker if you choose to print things out and purchase this speaker. You could have your own little playable terrain piece. So I'm really happy with this. I think it's going to be really cool, and it's all printed up. It's going to have to get mounted to the board and drilled out and wired and all of that. And that one's going to take a little bit more time because the board itself, my diorama base, is going to be a while before it's ready for all of this to be installed. But at this point, for my entire Castus Night project, we're getting pretty close to starting to paint everything. As for this as just a terrain piece, right, I also do have model, and I can give away the STL as well. It won't quite fit because this power cable here wasn't created at the point where I did the base. If you're watching my 3ds Max portion of this, you'll see that the base kind of lost its purpose. Once I started thinking about how it was going to be attached to the diorama base, it didn't need its own base. So again, that's a pretty simple thing. If you were going to actually use this as a piece of playable terrain, you would essentially just trace around it in 3ds Max or whatever piece of 3D software and just extrude a base to sit underneath it. And then it would get its own terrain to match your playing board and all of that. And it would make for a very cool piece. Now, obviously, like, the pipes are going to tip over, but once all these things are set up with just a small amount of space around them, you could easily just take the speaker out, and then you've got it, it's portable, and you can do whatever else you want with it. So that's coming from this little Bluetooth speaker. This would be kind of amazing, sitting in the middle of your table. And this was like the second thing I found. That's I believe a YouTube video that's just playing on my phone. Right, that's full volume. Sorry, just got a message. All right, wow, that was pretty crazy. Okay, this little thing gets pretty loud. That's pretty awesome, actually. I just had to set it back up and actually play some audio through it, so we could get an idea of what it was actually going to sound like, and that's really cool. It's even more exciting now once I actually know how cool it's going to be with really kick-ass audio playing through it. With all that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.